You are not exhausted because life has become too difficult. You are exhausted because you've been holding on to things that were never meant to rest on your shoulders. Before the day has even had a chance to begin, the mind is already running, revisiting old conversations, predicting future problems, and carrying thoughts that do not belong to this moment. And when something finally asks for your real attention, much of your energy is already gone. Not because you used it on action, but because it disappeared into endless mental noise. Long before the pace of modern life made this worse, the Stoics recognized something important. Most exhaustion does not come directly from reality. It grows from attachment that operates in the background, unnoticed, automatic, and rarely challenged. Every opinion, every emotional reaction, every possibility you create in your mind slowly starts demanding space. And after a while, that space begins to feel heavy. There is a quiet kind of strength in allowing certain things to move through you without holding on to them. Not because they have no value, but because they were never yours to carry. Opinions, expectations, reactions, outcomes. Each one quietly pulls your focus away from the only place where your power truly exists. Some battles begin before your feet even touch the floor in the morning. Taught that freedom begins when you learn to separate what belongs to you from what does not. Yet most people live in the opposite direction. They pour energy into what they cannot control and slowly lose connection with what they can. That is why life starts feeling heavier than it actually is. You wake up and before anything changes around you, something has already started changing within you. A thought appears, small enough to almost miss. Then another follows, then another. Soon the mind is no longer watching, it is reacting. It returns to something someone said. It replays it again and again, stretches it, reshapes it, searches for meaning that may not even be there. A simple moment begins collecting layers until it turns into something far heavier than it ever was. You start imagining what they really meant. Then you think about what you should have said. Then you begin creating scenes that have not even happened yet. And all of this happens before the day has truly started. Nothing real is taking place, yet your energy is already draining as though it is. That is where control quietly slips away. The strange thing is that it almost never feels like losing control. It feels productive. It feels like understanding. It feels like being aware. But awareness and entanglement are not the same thing. One simply notices, the other holds on. And once the mind begins holding on to everything it touches, it slowly forgets the difference between what exists and what it created. Your body may still be resting, but your mind has already run a marathon. Not because of effort itself, but because of energy spent in places it never needed to go. Once wrote that you have authority over your own mind, not over external events. The message itself is straightforward. Living by it is something else entirely, because the mind rarely stays where it is. It keeps reaching beyond itself, attaching to things outside its control, then responding to them as if they demand immediate action. When attention is pulled in too many directions, stability begins to disappear. This is not just philosophy sitting on a page. It shows up in ordinary life. When your focus follows every thought, every memory, every imagined possibility, your actions eventually begin doing the same. You start with intention, then slowly drift away. You make a decision, then question it. You take a step forward, then stop to look back. From the outside, it can look like a problem of discipline, but often it is something deeper. It is attention moving without direction. And there is a cost hidden inside that pattern. Not only tiredness, but gradual erosion. The ability to think clearly starts becoming weaker. Instead of choosing your responses, you begin reacting automatically. Instead of acting with purpose, you move according to whatever captures your mind in that moment. Entire days disappear this way, not because time was missing, but because attention never stayed in one place long enough to build anything meaningful. Sometimes what drains you is not what happened. It is what keeps repeating long after it happened. Explained this clearly when he taught that people are not disturbed by events themselves, but by the meaning they continue attaching to them. The struggle is rarely the event. It is the comment that stays in your head, the moment that keeps replaying, the situation you keep rebuilding in your mind, the imagined future that steals energy from the present. None of it is still happening. yet your attention keeps feeding it. And that attention is what gives it life. Once you begin noticing this, something starts to change. Not suddenly, quietly. You begin catching the moment a thought tries to pull you away. The moment the mind starts creating stories around something that has not happened at all. And right there, another possibility appears. Not to push the thought away, not to fight with it, just not to walk behind it. That is where control slowly returns. Not through force, but through restraint. Through the ability to witness a thought without stepping inside it. To recognize a pattern without continuing the cycle. And with practice, space begins to appear. Space that used to be filled with noise starts becoming clear again. Space where confusion once lived begins making room for direction. Then something powerful becomes possible. Intentional movement. When your attention is no longer being dragged everywhere at once, it can finally move where you choose. You begin what you truly intend to begin. You complete what you decide deserves your energy. Not perfectly, but steadily. Not because the world around you suddenly became easier, but because the way you relate to it began to change. People often underestimate how much life is shaped in these quiet spaces. The moments before conversations begin, before responsibilities arrive, before the world starts asking for your attention. Because when those moments are already crowded with unnecessary weight, everything that follows feels heavier. But when there is even a little clarity, the entire day starts to move differently. This is not about removing thoughts completely. It is about deciding which thoughts deserve your energy and which ones deserve to pass through untouched. Not every thought needs an invitation to stay. And once that becomes clear, something inside begins to settle. Not into complete silence, but into structure. And inside that structure, energy stops leaking away. It is no longer spent replaying the same stories. No longer drained by imagined futures. No longer scattered across things that never truly mattered. It becomes available again. For action, for attention, for purpose. And that begins changing more than you expect. If this way of seeing life speaks to you, subscribe. Not only for more content, but as a quiet commitment to return to clarity again and again. Because every time you choose discipline over noise, you strengthen something important. Slowly, consistently, and in a way that belongs to you. Because when you stop carrying yesterday into today and stop trying to live tomorrow before it arrives, you step into the present with something rare. Not only awareness, control, but the mind does not arrive there overnight. It develops through repetition, through small moments that often go unnoticed. Every reaction teaches something. Every time attention is given too freely, the mind learns from it. When something small happens and you treat it like something enormous, the mind remembers. When you feed energy into something with no lasting impact, the mind quietly labels it as important. And over time, these patterns begin building themselves. Not suddenly, gradually. What starts as occasional overthinking slowly becomes habit. Then habit becomes the way you operate without even realizing it. Eventually, the mind stops asking whether something deserves attention at all. It simply assumes it does. And that is when everything begins carrying the same emotional weight. A passing remark starts feeling like a personal wound. A small inconvenience begins following you like a serious problem. The ability to measure what truly matters starts fading away. And when everything feels important, nothing stays clear anymore. And when that sense of scale disappears, clarity slowly begins to disappear with it. Because clarity depends on separation. It comes from understanding what truly deserves your attention and what simply passes through. Without that distinction, everything starts merging into one endless feeling of urgency. Not real urgency, but a version created by the mind. And the body responds as if it were real, tightening itself, preparing itself, sending energy in every direction at once. Once wrote that we often suffer more in imagination than in reality, and that suffering is not always obvious. Most of the time it arrives quietly. It is subtle, almost invisible, a pressure sitting in the background that never fully leaves. It comes from thinking about what could happen, from replaying what already did happen, from assigning meaning to things that may have meant nothing at all. And because it happens inside the mind, it often escapes attention. It feels normal. It feels like reflection. It feels like being careful or aware. but many times it is simply noise that has been given far more importance than it deserves. A mind without discipline does not sort things carefully. It gathers. It keeps collecting pieces of everything it touches, especially anything carrying emotion. A certain look, the way someone spoke, a delayed reply, a single sentence. The mind stores it all, then it turns each piece into material for more thought. And the more it gathers, the heavier everything begins to feel. Not because life itself became heavier, but because nothing is being released. Everything gets saved, everything gets revisited, everything gets examined one more time. And eventually a cycle begins forming, where the past never completely leaves, while the future is constantly being rehearsed before it even arrives. Describe this pattern in another way when he suggested that what stays unconscious continues shaping our lives without us noticing it. And that influence rarely feels obvious. It does not feel like something happening inside you. It feels like pressure coming from the outside world, as if circumstances themselves are creating your experience. But often it is your own response creating the meaning attached to those circumstances. The habit of assigning too much weight to small things. The habit of reacting before observing. The habit of holding on to moments that should have already passed. These are not random events, they are patterns. And patterns, repeated long enough, slowly begin turning into identity. But change does not happen by forcing the mind into silence. That usually creates resistance instead of peace. Because the harder you push a thought away, the more attention you accidentally give it. And attention, even when resisting something, still keeps feeding it. That is why real discipline was never about shutting the mind down. It was about learning not to hand every thought control over where you go next. The goal was never to silence the mind completely. It was to learn how to lead it, to teach it what deserves your attention and what can simply be allowed to pass. Not through strict rules, but through repeated decisions. Every moment gives you that opportunity. A thought appears, and you decide whether to walk with it. A reaction begins to rise, and you decide whether it deserves to continue. At first, it can feel uncomfortable, even unnatural, because patterns built over time do not disappear in a single moment. The mind becomes familiar with repetition, and what is familiar often feels automatic. But patterns can be interrupted. And every interruption changes something, even if it seems small. Every moment you choose not to react unnecessarily, every time you decide not to feed what does not deserve your energy, the pattern weakens a little more. Small changes rarely look powerful while they are happening, but they grow, and eventually those small moments begin collecting into something larger. The mind slowly starts adjusting its expectations. It stops assuming that every thought will be followed to the end. It stops believing every emotional impulse requires a response. It begins learning something different. Not everything needs your participation. And with that realization comes a different kind of space. Not emptiness, openness. A place where thoughts can move through without being held onto. Where reactions can appear without controlling your actions. Like clouds passing through the sky, they can exist without needing to stay. This is where clarity quietly begins returning. Not because something new has been added, but because less interference is standing in the way. When the mind is no longer crowded, it can finally see things as they are. It can look at situations without covering them in unnecessary meaning. It can focus without constantly being pulled elsewhere. It can respond instead of react. And that changes the way you move through life. Decisions become cleaner, not because they suddenly become easy, but because they are no longer carrying extra weight that never belonged there. Actions become more direct, not because doubt disappears, but because doubt is no longer being fed by endless mental noise. And slowly, a sense of steadiness starts taking shape. You stop feeling like your attention is constantly being taken from you. You begin realizing that it can be guided, that it can be chosen. It matters to understand something here. This is not about becoming cold or detached. It is not about caring less. It is about caring carefully, giving your energy to what truly deserves it, and refusing to spend it where it only disappears. Because once energy leaves you, it does not return unchanged. It shapes the way you think, the way you act, the way you meet everything that comes after. When everything is treated as equally important, your energy becomes scattered. But when you begin choosing deliberately where your attention goes, something changes. That energy becomes focused, and focused energy creates impact. It allows you to fully step into what matters without being pulled apart by everything that doesn't, without being pulled away by everything that does not deserve your focus. This is the quiet kind of discipline that slowly changes a person, not through a dramatic breakthrough, not through one life-changing moment, but through a steady shift in the way the mind begins to operate, a movement away from automatic reactions and toward deliberate responses. And as that process continues, the difference becomes impossible to ignore, not only in the way you think, but in the way you experience life itself. Because when unnecessary weight is no longer being carried, what remains starts becoming easier to see. There is also another quiet habit that often goes unnoticed because it disguises itself as intelligence. It even feels responsible. It is the habit of forming opinions about everything. Something happens, and the mind immediately responds. Someone makes a choice, and the mind starts evaluating it. A headline appears, a comment is heard, something distant unfolds somewhere in the world, and almost automatically the mind begins creating judgments. It feels normal, it feels like awareness, but slowly something begins changing beneath the surface. The mind becomes crowded, not with what is useful, but with what was never necessary in the first place. This is where confusion often begins. Many people assume that having thoughts and opinions about everything means they are paying attention, that it means they are deeply connected with the world around them. But awareness does not require constant judgment. In many cases, constant judgment begins weakening awareness because it keeps adding layers where none were needed. Observation becomes interpretation. Interpretation becomes attachment. And once attachment takes hold, the mind stops moving freely. It becomes tied to things that were never meant to carry its energy. Expressed this with remarkable clarity when he suggested that growth sometimes requires being comfortable with appearing foolish in the eyes of others. There is a quiet strength inside that idea. Because choosing not to react, choosing not to engage with everything, choosing not to form an immediate opinion can look strange from the outside. Some people may mistake it for indifference, but often it is discipline. It is the ability to resist the pull of unnecessary involvement, to allow something to pass without feeling the need to label it, analyze it, or make it part of your mental world. And that kind of restraint protects energy in a way constant reaction never can. But the mind does not naturally move toward restraint. It prefers movement. It searches for stimulation. It searches for meaning. It wants to organize and define every experience it touches. And in doing that, it creates an endless current of activity beneath the surface. That is why stepping back can feel difficult. Not because it cannot be done, but because it asks you to move against a pattern that has been running quietly for a long time. The deeper understanding is realizing that the goal was never to stop thinking altogether. The goal is to shape thought with intention, to remove what is unnecessary and keep only what has value. And when that begins happening, something changes. The mind becomes lighter, not empty, just no longer carrying weight it never needed. It becomes able to move through situations without getting trapped inside every one of them. There is a quiet freedom in that, the ability to witness something and allow it to continue on its way, to notice without needing to define, to experience without immediately becoming attached, to remain untouched by what was never part of your path to begin with. And over time, that freedom becomes a kind of stability. Not stability built on circumstances always going your way, but stability built on how you choose to meet those circumstances. Because once you stop caring what never belonged to you, it becomes easier to recognize what actually does. There is also an important difference between feeling something and caring it. Most people cross that line without even realizing it. Emotions are natural. They rise, respond to life, and reflect what is happening in the moment. They move through you the way they were meant to, but somewhere along the way, that movement often stops. What was supposed to pass begins staying. What was meant to be noticed begins settling in. And slowly, almost invisibly, you start carrying far more than you need to. Not because life demanded it, but because holding on quietly became a habit. It starts with small things. Someone else is stressed, and suddenly that tension becomes yours too. A conversation ends, but part of it keeps following you long after it is over. Something minor goes wrong, and instead of adjusting and moving on, it stays in your thoughts and begins shaping everything that comes after. None of these moments seem important by themselves, but together they build a pattern, a steady collection of emotional weight that gathers throughout one day, then quietly follows you into the next. This is often where exhaustion starts taking form, not through physical effort, not through major difficulties, but through the constant presence of emotional residue that was never released. And because it builds quietly, it often escapes attention, yet its effects begin appearing everywhere. You notice it when thinking feels slower. You notice it when your reactions feel heavier than they should. You notice it when even simple things start asking for more energy than they once did. And when you try to find the reason, nothing seems big enough to explain it. Once suggested that when something external disturbs you, the suffering often comes less from the event itself and more from the meaning attached to it. That meaning is what turns moments into burdens. It is what stretches an emotion far beyond the time it was meant to exist. Because the event itself is brief. It arrives, it happens, then it leaves. But what often remains is the story the mind continues telling long after the moment itself has already passed. Your continued involvement with it is what keeps it alive. And as long as it keeps occupying space in your mind, it continues drawing energy from you. Understanding this after someone points it out is not usually the difficult part. The difficult part is recognizing it while it is happening, because the process rarely announces itself. A reaction appears, and before you even notice it, you are already inside it, already thinking through it, already feeling it, already carrying it beyond the moment where it began. By the time awareness catches up, roots have already started forming. And this is one reason emotional weight can feel unavoidable. People often notice it only after they have already accepted it. Once observed that we suffer more from imagination than from reality itself. And that kind of suffering is not always dramatic or obvious. Most of the time it happens quietly. It stretches across hours, sometimes across entire days. It is created by staying connected to something that has already ended. And once you begin seeing that, you begin noticing something else as well. You begin seeing where your energy has been going. The purpose here is not to become indifferent. That is where many people misunderstand this kind of thinking. Indifference suggests distance. It suggests not caring at all, disconnecting from life and experience. But that is not what is being built. What is being developed is selectivity, the ability to feel something without carrying it beyond its moment, to notice something without holding on to it, to respond without turning the response into an endless cycle. And when you begin practicing that, the change is rarely immediate, but it becomes visible. You begin noticing how often emotions are accepted automatically, how often you pick up weight that was never yours. You begin seeing how frequently you say yes without realizing it. And once you notice it, you gain the ability to interrupt it. Not perfectly, not every single time, but enough to create movement, enough to reduce what keeps building beneath the surface. And as that accumulation begins to fade, something else starts appearing in its place. A sense of lightness, not because life suddenly stopped happening, but because you stopped adding extra weight to what was already there. Situations still happen. People still act in ways outside your control. Outcomes still change without asking for permission. But your connection to those things starts shifting. You experience them, you move through them, but you no longer carry them with you in the same way. And that changes how you move through your days. Reactions begin lasting less time. Recovery becomes easier. The distance between what happens and how you respond becomes easier to notice. And inside that space, something powerful begins to return. Choice. Control begins to return, not control over every situation or outcome, but control over how long something is allowed to live inside you. And with that, another change starts becoming noticeable. The way you think begins shifting. When the mind is no longer carrying layers of emotional residue, it starts becoming clearer, sharper, more present. Decisions are made with greater precision, not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because those decisions are no longer passing through unnecessary emotional noise. Action becomes cleaner, movement becomes steadier, and over time, what once required constant effort begins feeling more natural. The mind starts releasing things with less resistance. It no longer assumes every emotion needs to stay or every reaction deserves to continue. It slowly learns something important. Letting go is not losing something. Sometimes it is simply removing what was never needed, and that changes more than it seems. Because energy that was once spent carrying extra weight becomes available again. Available for action, available for focus, available for creating something meaningful. The difference may not always be visible from the outside, but internally it becomes unmistakable. There is less friction between thought and action, less resistance, more movement. Things stop feeling like they are constantly pulling against you, and eventually something becomes clear. Emotional weight is not always created by the world itself. Often it is created by the relationship you continue building with what happens, not by the event, but by what you continue holding after the event has already passed. And once you start releasing what no longer serves you, you begin realizing something surprising. A large part of the weight you carried was optional all along. There is another quiet pattern hidden inside everyday life, and most of the time it is not built from major events. It comes from small things. A comment that stays in your mind longer than it should. A delay that quietly throws off your rhythm. A minor inconvenience that shifts your mood just enough to affect everything after it. None of these moments are powerful enough to define your day on their own, but they rarely arrive alone. Each one leaves something behind, and those traces slowly begin collecting. What starts as a small interruption becomes a series of small interruptions, and over time, those interruptions begin breaking apart your attention. At first, it seems manageable. You notice it, you react, you continue moving. But reactions do not always end when the moment itself ends. Sometimes they keep traveling with you. They stay in your thinking. They influence your next decision. They quietly step into your next conversation. And before the next small disruption appears, something inside has already shifted. Not in an obvious way, just enough for your response to feel slightly heavier, slightly slower, slightly farther away from the clarity you had before. And this pattern continues quietly throughout the day. What makes it difficult to notice is how small each moment appears on its own. None of them seem important enough to deserve much attention when viewed separately, but together they begin creating something larger. Because small things repeated consistently always create an effect over time. And when that consistency is built on reaction instead of intention, it slowly starts pulling you away from where your attention was meant to be. A few moments here, a few reactions there, and before you realize it, your focus is no longer moving in the direction you chose. Spoke about a kind of steadiness that comes from changing your perspective. Not a perspective that removes difficulty, but one that removes resistance toward it. Because resistance is often what gives small moments their power. The delay itself lasts only a moment. The comment itself passes quickly. But the struggle against it, the internal argument with something that has already happened, that is what extends its presence. Because when you resist something, you remain connected to it. You replay it, you examine it, you return to it again and again inside your own mind. And each return quietly gives it more life. What could have simply passed through your day becomes something that follows you instead. Not because it had to, but because attention kept feeding it. And attention has a strange tendency. Whatever it rests on, it strengthens. Over time, the effects begin becoming visible. You stay busy. You keep moving. You spend the entire day doing things, but by the time evening arrives, something feels off. It feels as though nothing meaningful truly moved forward. Not because there was no effort, but because that effort kept being divided, pulled apart by dozens of small reactions, each one taking away just enough attention to interrupt momentum, while appearing too small to matter on its own. Once expressed the idea that obstacles themselves can become part of the path, and that changes the way interruptions are seen. Instead of viewing them as something standing against progress, you begin seeing them as something that can exist without taking control of it. Not by forcing every difficulty to become useful, but by refusing to let it pull you away from where you intended to go.